Please tell us about ancient Indian education system. Can we use the system today in India and throw the Macaulayan system out? So this is a question that many people asked yesterday as well. The ancient Indian education system was primarily based around temples, which is very counterintuitive because today we see temples as places of worship. So temples were places of worship, but they were also cultural and social centers and centers of education. So in ancient India, before the events of the past 1000 years, you had temples everywhere. Every town, every village, every locality had a temple. Usually these would be small temples with one single priest or brahmin who would carry out the duties, but there would be places where you had larger temples, and every temple was not just a place of worship, it was a school. The local children would get an education over there. So basically the smallest temples would impart basic education, uh, language, grammar, basic mathematics, and things like that. The language of education was always Sanskrit. You always had two languages of education. One was Sanskrit and one was your local language. So there is this historian called Dharampal, who was a Gandhian who lived in the 20th century. He spent a number of years in the UK. He spent a number of years in Britain after India's independence, and he accessed a lot of the historical data that the British had collected about India's education system before they imposed the Macaulayan system on India. So this data is from the 19th century, essentially. So Dharampal accessed a great amount of this data. He analyzed it, and he wrote a book called the Beautiful Tree, I believe, in which he has shown what kind of education system was still prevalent in the 19th century. So what he found from the British data, which is the British collected, is that temples were the places of education. Education was provided to every child, girls, boys, everybody, all the jatis, all the varnas, the so-called castes, everybody got the education. The education was always free. It was subsidized by the local king or ruler or whoever it was. So you never had to pay for education. In the small temples, you had basic education, like I said. In larger temples, in bigger cities, you would find that you would get somewhat higher education. And you had the great temples in certain places where you would get really high education. And then you had the great viharas, monasteries, and then you had the great universities of India, the great Vishwavidyalayas. So there were so many of these: Nalanda, Takshashila, Telhara, Udantapuri, Vikramashila, Sharda Peeth, and so many more. We only know of a few today, but there were so many more of these. And these great universities was where you would get the highest education available anywhere in the world. So you would be taught subjects like pharmacology, toxicology, advanced mathematics, calculus, infinite series, trigonometry, astronomy, and much more, and also philosophical subjects. You had so many schools of philosophical thought in India, starting from Charvaka, Vedanta, Mimamsa, and so many more. So all of this was taught, all of this was researched. There were many schools of thought, there were many great scholars, and this is the education system that India had. And so the small temples did double as gurukuls essentially, and so on. So this education system was spread throughout the length and the breadth of this country, and all the education was free. It was open to anybody. And in the great universities, the only impediment to entering was your intellect and your knowledge. So you would have entrance tests, and if you passed the entrance test, if you were found to be at that level of intellectual of intellect, and if you had that amount, the amount of knowledge required to gain entry, then you would gain entry. You would be given admission, and you would be imparted education for free in these universities, and anybody could come to the universities and study there. Many Chinese pilgrims are known to have studied in India's great universities. Even Greek pilgrims have done that, and so on. Scythians too. So it was open to everyone, even to foreigners, even to people who did not identify as Indians or Hindus. It was open to all. The only requirement was that you needed to be at that level of intellect. So that is the kind of education system we had. It was the greatest education system the world has ever seen. Today's education system is I don't have sufficiently strong words to describe how bad it is. It is rubbish. It is a pale imitation of the Western education system. And let me tell you about the West. If you look at the United States, the education system they have imposes an enormous burden on the children, an enormous financial burden on students, especially higher education. I mean, on average, the average student who passes out of this education system at the college level incurs a debt of about 44,000 US dollars. And then they have to work for many years to pay this debt off. So the Western education system, especially the American one, is just is all about commercializing education. Education has become a commodity. Degrees have become commodities. You pay a certain amount of money, you will get admission, and you may even find, unfortunately, there have been certain scandals in the Ivy League universities recently, in which it was found that you could actually pay to get a PhD, and you could actually purchase degrees there. So that is the state of the education system in the United States. It is all about money. It's a capitalist system. I am not advocating Marxism or socialism. I'm just saying that commercializing education is very wrong. It's going to have a very deleterious effect on society. So we are currently trying to copy that system, which is not good at all. It's going to have very adverse effects on Indian society in the long term. In the long term. So is it possible to bring back the old system? It would require a great deal of reforms over a certain period of time. But it would be good if we could do that, because we had the best system in the world, and it's been destroyed by the British, and we have not taken the initiative to bring it back.